Today, we are going to be going over Genesis chapter 34, and it's a chapter that is most often given the subtitle, The Rape of Dinah. I have changed it to Avenging Family Honor, and I was strongly tempted to changing it to The Rape of Dinah's Brothers or The Rape of Jacob, because in fact, this is the depressing part, it is not the assault on Dinah that is the real issue here. That assault becomes the catalyst for what follows. Yeah. But what really is at stake in the world in which we find ourselves in this ancient pre-Israel world, what's really at stake here is the family honor. That's what matters. And the positive message, as we'll find, is that there are better ways to settling disputes with neighboring tribes and peoples rather than violence. And so the original hearers of the story would have gotten a positive message I would sign off on, which is no to violence, find other ways. But we often subtitle this story The Rape of Dinah because modern readers have her interest more at play. But as we'll see as we go through it, she is never given a voice. We are never told what she thinks about what happens, and she is given no volition. And so it is a story that it's possible to come away with a positive message when you contextualize it. But for me, it's hard to leave with a primarily positive message when Dinah is so poorly treated in this story throughout. But before we get to that, there's a few scripture passages that are a segue to today's story at the end of chapter 33, which read, Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Padam Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the plot of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. The final verses of chapter 33 bring us into a new stage in Jacob's life. He settles in Shechem, a location that will become a significant Israelite center. Jacob's return journey to the promised land parallels the earlier journey of his grandfather Abraham. And the Torah, I should add as an aside, is full of these parallels where the patriarchs of old each mirror one another in the similar trajectories that their lives take. And this is on purpose to help readers of the Torah in their own time and place find the parallels and the similarities in their own journeying through wilderness to promised land. So it's just a nice little way of tying future generations into the text. But the reading from Green in the Common English Bible Commentary continues. Both make their first stop at Shechem and build an altar there to God. Jacob acquires land through purchase as occurred elsewhere in Genesis. The peace between Jacob and the people of Shechem contrasts sharply with the conflict between them in the story that follows. And here we go. Chapter 34, verse 1. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the woman of the region. When Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the region, saw her, he seized her and lay with her by force. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob. He loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this girl to be my wife. What is the crime here? Well, obviously, the rape of Dinah, or so one would think. However, the narrator immediately moves past the act of violence and begins to describe Shechem's feelings for Dinah in terms of endearment. Quoting, and his soul was drawn to Dinah. He loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. Fritham writes, in the narrator's words, Shechem proceeds to act in a way atypical of rapists. He clings to Dinah, loves her, as Isaac and Jacob love Rebekah and Rachel, and speaks to her heart as Joseph does to his brothers. The latter phrase may cause Dinah's positive response. As revolting as the rape of Dinah is, this turn of events shifts the reader's response to Shechem in more positive directions. Moreover, the presence of love language for Dinah on part of both Hamor and the narrator, word used of God's love and delight in other parts of the scripture, reinforces Shechem's sincerity. Sympathy for Shechem continues to develop based on his generous statement in verses 11 through 12. At the same time, this language predisposes the reader to be alert to the sons of Jacob. And so I say that's commentary, obviously written by a man. Lines like the latter phrase may cause Dinah's positive response. Well, where do you see a positive response? There's no response on Dinah's part. She is a foil for the sake of the story and the narrative, as best as I can see. And the love, the Bible doesn't put the love in quotes here. He loved the girl, but I would want to put loved in quotes because we have a violent assault on a woman, and then now that Shechem begins to use words of endearment, the audience is supposed to think, okay, well, so what is he going to do to make good on the assault? And in this case, the answer is marry the girl, which passes in the world that we're dealing with here. So marrying her, and again, with Dinah's consent, I think not. So the words used to describe Shechem's feelings about Dinah are the same used to describe love in a positive sense. The reader is meant to see what transpires as evidence that Shechem is basically a good and honorable man who wants to make right by the house of Jacob by way of a proper marriage and lavish gifts. Again, this is the way that the original audience would have read this. We want to give it the title, The Rape of Dinah, and make it rightfully so about Dinah, the voiceless victim. But working within the world of this text, that is not the primary concern here. The primary concern is how can Shechem now make it right after he has slept with a woman who is presumably a virgin, because that is the real crime. Remember that virginity, as we will read here in a quote in just one second, belongs to the men in the family. We can't tell exactly what the storyteller meant to say about how Shechem treated Dinah. The Hebrew word translated lay with her by force is sometimes used to mean putting a virgin in a difficult social situation by having sex with her before marriage. In this case, the man was required to marry the woman and couldn't divorce her. In other texts, this Hebrew word refers to abusive sex, that is rape. Because the story stresses Shechem's love for Dinah, it may imply the first meeting. And by the way, I think the narrator does want us to think of the first meeting, that this is a basically okay guy who is now going to broker a marriage deal. But going on with the quote, that by having sex with Dinah before marriage, Shechem damaged Dinah's social standing. As required, he seeks to marry her. In any event, Dinah's brothers clearly felt Shechem had committed a serious wrong. That's a quote from the Common English Bible Commentary. Going on with the story, verse 5. Now Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his cattle in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him, just as the sons of Jacob came in from the field. When they heard of it, the men were indignant and very angry because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. So, defiled his daughter Dinah. Modern readers will read the defilement of Dinah as the crux of the story, the real crime at hand. In fact, the violence done to Dinah serves as the pretext to what was viewed by ancient readers as a far greater crime, violence towards one's neighbors. But before we move on to that, let's consider first the crime, Dinah's rape. Who has been wronged here? Well, Dinah, of course, or so modern readers would assume, but not so in times of ancient Israel. Jennifer Ebeling writes, a wife's sexuality belonged exclusively to her husband, and the law demanded that wives be virgins. If an unmarried girl is guilty of sex before marriage, it is a crime against her father. If she is married, it is a crime against her husband. So notice, it's not a crime against the woman. So from the perspective of the narrator, the person who has been most sorely used is Jacob and not Dinah. The house of Jacob has been abused. It is the family honor that has been impugned, which is why Dinah is from here forward is named as the daughter of Jacob, or lying with Jacob's daughter. Her name even falls off. The whole while, Dinah is never given a voice. We never discover how she felt about the violence done to her. The scribe did not write down one word spoken by Dinah. As the story unfolds, the focus shifts to family honor and a tribal dispute. All this to say, the focus going forward will be on how the men feel about what has transpired. The real crime from the point of view of the narrator will be the actions of Dinah's brothers in response to the violation of their sister. Notice how the response of Jacob differs from that of his sons, Dinah's brothers. Jacob utilizes diplomacy. He speaks with the Hittite patriarch, his counterpart, to navigate the delicate situation. His solution, as we will see, may well have settled things peacefully. His sons, however, upon overhearing what transpired, are angered to such a degree that they begin to plot vengeance. They feel they must defend the family honor. And to be sure, it is the family that has been most sorely wronged and not Dinah, as is evidenced by the language used to explain their anger. They were angry because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. For such a thing ought not to be done. Emphasis is placed on Jacob's daughter to note how Dinah is no longer named. It is Jacob who has been wronged. It is Jacob's honor that is at stake. It is Jacob's house that must be avenged. Verse 8. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the heart of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall live with us, and the land shall be open to you. Live and trade in it, and get property in it. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor with you, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Put the marriage present and gift as high as you like, and I will give whatever you ask me. Only give me the girl to be my wife. Again, notice the girl, not Dinah. So the patriarchs start to negotiate a deal. Hamor is very forward thinking, envisioning a time when the two tribes will intermingle and intermarry, sharing resources and living well together. The rapist Shechem enters into negotiations, promising anything for Dinah's hand in marriage, the woman he loves. And again, I put love in quotes, but remember, the narrator makes the claim that Shechem loves her without irony. So someone in the ancient world might even have read this as something like a romance in part, which is quite sobering. Verse 13. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. There's her name again. Very good. They said to them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, that you will be as we are, and every male among you be circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live among you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone. So Jacob's sons enter into the negotiation, saying things like, we cannot do this thing. Remind me then, is it Dinah or her brothers who are entering into a marriage? They speak as if it's all about them. For that would be a disgrace to us if they weren't circumcised. Again, shame on the family, the men in the family specifically, and not Dinah. So again, the situation is framed in such a way as to place the men in the family as those who have been aggrieved. And Jacob's sons make an offer, one that strikes modern readers as uncouth and extreme. They tell Shechem and Hamor that if they and all the men in the city are circumcised, then they can enter into a long-term partnership, living among them and becoming one people. In fact, this is a very generous offer and a token of full-on inclusion. One might even make the claim that this is an offer in keeping with the original vision that Abraham was given, where they would be a blessing to all people and all nations would be blessed by them. This way of, remember, circumcision is a sign of the covenant between God and the children of Abraham. So in asking for all the men of Shechem to be circumcised, Jacob's sons are inviting the Hittites into this covenant in a way, or so it would appear. In fact, Simeon and Levi are hatching a nefarious plot. Reading on, their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his family. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of the city, saying, "These people are friendly with us. Let them live in the land and trade in it, for the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will they agree to live among us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their animals be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will live among us." And all who went out of the city gate heeded Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. This picture here was the only thing I could learn about it was that it's from an archive in Russia, a Russian art museum, and the artist, so far as I could tell, is unknown. I just thought it was somewhat comical. This is, I guess, how looks like medieval, or I don't know, I can't exactly date this, I'm no art expert, but something hundreds of years old, and they look almost happy about what's happening, from my estimation. But I don't know.
Looks very English.
Yeah.
The clothes and the buildings.
If you look in the middle, there's this one guy kind of crouched over, sort of sneaking up with a knife.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I just think it's pretty fun. Not that it would be fun, but this picture makes me laugh. So imagine convincing all of the men in your community to do this. However, the payoff would be great. Indeed, here would be a merger of mutual benefit. Both tribes would prosper as they shared resources and deepened the bonds of partnership with future marriages. Remember, marriages were important contractual arrangements between families and tribes. In short, this arrangement was nothing short of a peace accord, a treaty between neighbors for the mutual benefit of both. From the perspective of Hamor and Shechem, what may well have ended in violence has had a very positive outcome. This explains the willingness of all the men to agree to be circumcised, a small price to pay when all things are considered. Verse 25. On the third day, when they were still in pain, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city unawares and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. And the other sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered their city because their sister had been defiled. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever in the city and was in the city and was in the field. All their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and made their prey. Spooky. Fritham writes, Simeon and Levi, two of Dinah's full brothers, take the initiative in following through on the deceit they and their brothers have schemed. They break faith with their new blood brothers, weakened by the circumcision, writes Fritham. Verse 29 reads especially ominous. All their wealth, all their little ones, and all their wives, all that was in the house, they captured and made their prey. The story began with one voiceless victim, Dinah. The men in their family took her violation as an affront to their father and themselves. Now they have taken out their anger and have multiplied the suffering many times over. They have murdered the men of an entire city and have taken the women and children and have made them their quote unquote prey. In so doing, the people of the covenant between God and Abraham, who were meant to be a blessing to all nations, have become a curse to their neighbors. From the perspective of this story's narrator and its early readers, this would be the most important takeaway. Dinah's rape was but the catalyst for such events, and outrage at the crime has more to do with family honor than her personal violation. And before I read on, I just point out in this picture here, the story begins with her being carried off by a man, and now the story ends, as far as Dinah's concerned, with her being carted away to some other place. She's just sort of whisked around in the story at the whims of the men around her. Verse 30. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. But they said, should our sister be treated like a whore? So Jacob renounces the actions of his two sons and condemns their violence. This is the point we are meant to take away from the story. Violence begets violence, and if we are to live well with others, we must take the paths of diplomacy and peacemaking. Fritham writes, the story illustrates how violence begets violence. A response of violence sets in motion even deeper levels of violence, and in the end places the future of the chosen family in jeopardy. And Green writes, later, on his deathbed, Jacob disinherits both Simeon and Levi because of their excessive violence. And we'll read that some chapters later. This story, therefore, reaffirms a value seen elsewhere in Genesis, that conflict between families and between tribes and nations should be resolved peacefully rather than through violence. Of course, neither this analysis nor the narrative itself takes into consideration the viewpoint of Dinah, the woman at the center of this story. We never hear her voice. This illustrates once again the male-centered character of biblical society, where the welfare of daughters, sisters, and wives is determined by their legal guardians, their fathers, brothers, and husbands. While the story describes a struggle between two male responses, it doesn't explore the response of the female, even though she is the central character of the story. So to conclude, I can and I do get behind this story's main point that peaceful ways must be found to settle disputes between ourselves and other persons, families, tribes, and nations. This story would have served as a cautionary tale to later generations of Israelites who were often presented opportunities to choose peace over violence against their regional neighbors. We do well to consider the ramifications of our violence today. However, what I cannot get behind is how Dinah serves more as a foil for the story than anything else. The crime is not framed so much as against her, but as against her brothers and her father. The narrator even portrays her rapist in a positive light in describing his great love for the woman he has taken by force. Dinah's thoughts on what then transpired are never included in the narrative. She has no speaking lines. We do not know how she felt when she was forcibly removed from Shechem's house, and how she felt really didn't matter. We see all too clearly in the story how little volition women had in those days. They might have been sexually assaulted, given in marriage, and then forcibly removed from her new husband's home, and all this in the matter of a few days, and with no input or say in the matter. Notice, as I said before, Dinah's involvement in the story begins and ends with her being carried away by men. And in conclusion, one last thing I'd like to read. This is from Dinah's official Wikipedia page. And this is scholarly laziness at its finest, but it was what I had time for. So I'd like to read the symbol that she has become for Black womanhood. In the 19th century, in 19th century America, Dinah became a generic term for an enslaved African woman. At the 1850 Women's Rights Convention in New York, a speech by Sojourner Truth was reported on in the New York Herald, which used the name Dinah to symbolize Black womanhood as represented by Truth. In a convention where sex and color are mingled, this is quoting Sojourner Truth here, in a convention where sex and color are mingled together in the common rights of humanity, Dinah and Burleigh and Lucretia and Frederick Douglass are all spiritually of one color and one sex, and all on a perfect footing of reciprocity. Most assuredly, Dinah was well posted up on the rights of woman, and with something of the ardor and the odor of her native Africa, she contended for her right to vote, to hold office, to practice medicine and the law, and to wear the breeches with the best white man that walks upon God's earth. So yeah, Dinah was given as a pejorative term by the slave owners to Black women, and here we see Sojourner Truth wresting it back and giving it neutering it of its derogatory punch and making it a term of enabling Black women. Here are my sources. So that's a lot. I guess I'm curious to see some thoughts or questions that you might have.
I don't know. I guess I don't see it as you see it. when he's willing to pay for, it's like, I'm going to pay to cover up my sins. And like today, if someone was going to court, rather than having to face a judge, a jury, or whatever, that they might be willing to put out some money to keep things quiet. And many times with these very rich people, we hear that their victims are silenced by money, and they have to sign agreements that they won't say anything. I mean, that's, when I first heard that, that's what I thought of as he was trying.
That isn't exactly different. There's part of what you just said is also working in the story, where the prince, Shechem is the prince. He is the royal heir. And so he does have all of these resources. However, the deal that he brokers with Jacob that would have ended peaceably and as a merger between these two tribes was part and parcel of how marriages functioned, where dowries would be sent with the woman. And that was what the later Levitical law would require, where a man could take a woman, accost her. If she were a virgin, have sex with her. If she were married, that would have been a serious problem, and the penalty would be death. If she were not married, then it's between the man and the father, and he can end it with his own honor intact if he marries her with the agreement of the woman's father. That's there's the distinction that is cultural and thousands of years old that we don't carry with us today. But what you said about the how power and money and resources enable and abet this. I mean, if Shechem had not had the political cachet or the position he held in his tribe, in his city, the city that would be named after him, Shechem. If say he was a servant that raped Dinah, I don't think there would have been any question of marriage. I think that servant would have been killed. Because in that culture of honor and shame, where those of high honor are like somewhere along the pecking order, and when you're trying to broker a marriage, you're trying to marry above your grade. And it seems that Jacob's sons, the real problem they had was that their sister, in their estimation, was going to marry below her grade. And that's why they were upset. And they felt like the power balance between Jacob's family and the Hittites was now going to be imbalanced to their deficit. And that wasn't Jacob's opinion. And it seems like that Shechem and his father were pretty excited about the arrangement, as you can see them visioning for a future where there'll be more intermarriages and a sharing of livestock and resources. And this all would have been fairly normal and with no need for moral condemnation or judgment in the world of this text. The real problem that the ancient readers would have had was the violence done to the city of Shechem. And it's a cautionary tale against violence and encouraging those who read it to settle tribal disputes or any dispute of any kind peacefully and with diplomacy. That's the point. And again, I like that point as it stands alone. My problem with this story is that Dinah is just the catalyst for the narrative to move along. Her violation is not what the ancient readers are upset about in the story. And that's where I think modern readers find the biggest problem with it.
The other thing I wonder about is, how do two men go in and kill all the other men in the city? So I am thinking Shechem is not a very large city.
Well, the commentators are funny about this. Some will say, well, they must have done it at night and covertly. Those are wanting to take it very literally. There is one detail that I missed upon my first several readings. where it says that they were joined by their brothers. And indeed, later in the Torah, the brothers are lumped in as part of, like, it's mentioned later that they were part of this wrongful act as well. The way that it puts it is, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers. You know what? I don't, maybe I thought I saw it and now I don't.
Well, I could understand if they went in at night and went from house to house to house to house, that they could get away with it.
Well, as a story,
probably.
as a story, the way we're supposed to read it, I think, and whether you want to take this as like a historically accurate telling or more of a kind of a silly, I'm trying to find a better word than silly, part of the narrative is we're supposed to imagine all of these waylaid men with pain in their genitals, hapless, laying around, because these two tricksters have put them in that position of disadvantage. And so it's like almost like a Trojan horse-esque kind of, but very different too, a way of infiltrating a town and setting, having the numbers against you, but then setting things in your favor by way of a deception. But yeah, it's
if I thought someone was going to take my life and even though I were in pain, I'd still be fighting and making a lot of noise so everybody else heard what was happening.
So can I go back to one thing that kind of bothers me, and that is that the cultural slant here is, of course, that Jacob has been wronged. His daughter's rape is a major insult to him. But then the brothers seem to be standing up for Dinah. I mean, kind of. They say her name, and they're outraged about what happened to her. I mean, maybe a little bit. What they said was,
we're making assumptions. I'm making assumptions, not you. When you try to get at what motivates folks in these ancient texts, you try to understand the culture and how people thought back then. And what we do know is that what was done to the women, how they married and how they were treated, the crime was against the guardians in their lives. That's who it mattered to, the family honor, and specifically the men, and how it related to how inheritance would be passed on.
Okay.
And
let me just go on for a minute. Okay, so that when they opposed this marriage, that we're not going to let our sister marry you heathens who are uncircumcised. You have to be certain. So do you think that was genuine, or were they hatching this plot then, Simeon and Levi?
I think it was a plot because they waited. I don't know. It's hard to take them at face value considering what they did next.
Okay. So no,
but that is an assumption.
Who knows? Okay. Yeah. So who knows? But Jacob and Hamor bought it because they thought, peace forever. We're going to have this intermingling of our tribes and cultures, and so Jacob got duped again. And
yes. We are also supposed to remember Jacob's the trickster usually, and now Jacob is telling his sons who are using deception. Again, we have to project. I guess it could be interpreted. Perhaps they meant it at first. Do this, get circumcised, and we'll be fine. And they thought about it for a few days, and then went and I don't know. I think that was part of the plot the whole time. It's just my opinion, but yeah, when Jacob at the end of this, the trickster now chides those who are
okay. Who are he got tricked by. He was tricked by Laban for a while. Yeah. I mean, the marriage thing with Leah and Rachel, and that was a trick. So he's been tricked before, and been the trickster. And so there's this ongoing thing in this family of pulling tricks, but this one's pretty extreme.
Yeah, it's a bit over the top.
This one's a bit over the top, yeah. So okay, I hear your pain about Dinah. I mean that she just is the the thing that sets off the reaction, but not there's no other purpose for her in this story.
It's a fairly modern inclination to want to take her plight seriously. In the artwork too. I mean, I was just like, okay, do I type into the Google search the rape of Dinah, and what am I gonna find? And there was a lot of European 16th, 17th, 18th century art that did a similar thing to Dinah that was done to Hagar, cast her as this sort of
temptress, or
not more pure and innocent, but not necessarily repulsed. Maybe close to damsel in distress, but not very distressed. Was the sort of way that it was done. And I think one of the reasons why it gets a big pass as well is because of our tendency to take the words of the men in the story at face value. And I'm just going through a podcast on the book Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Now, the term Lolita, as it functions in our society, is this, and in the movies that have been made about this book, are as a young girl, teenager, who is a seductress of some kind, and that's the way it's understood. And the book Lolita has been thought to be a pro-rape, pro-pedophile book, when in fact Nabokov, who wrote it, couldn't have been more anti-pedophile and against what happened in the book. Could not have been more against what he described in the book. He had been sexually abused himself and was writing a book to show how monstrous the character was, even as the Herbert is the name of the man, even as he frames himself as a very loving, endearing, doting male. And I was reminded of the connection between the way that Shechem describes himself. I love this girl. I must have this girl. Is the way that this pedophile in Nabokov's book describes his own love for this girl, who in fact wants nothing to do with it. And it's a tragic tale where the voice of Lolita, who has another name, that's not even her real name, her real name is Dolores. She's never given voice, and she's told entirely from the perspective of her abuser. And then it gets pushed into popular culture, and people taking Humbert at his word. And as he describes her as some sort of seductress, his way, that her role as tragic victim is entirely lost. And now as it's foisted into popular culture, Lolita has become a term for a wanton young girl. And it's terrible because you could not have a more anti-predatory book written. And I think that says more about our culture than anything. And I think that says a lot about the cultures that interpret stories like what we're seeing here, where you hear Shechem say, oh, but I love the girl, I must have the girl, using words that are used to describe God's love for humanity in other parts of the Bible, used to describe Isaac's love for Rebecca, same Hebrew words used, and we just take it at face value and never scratch below the surface. And it's what happens when those when people like Dinah, who aren't given voice, I guess, is why I get so worked up about it. And whether it's hush money today, or it's just a tendency to not want to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a movie out that it's tough to watch, but it's kind of about this. called Promising Young Woman. I don't know if I would recommend it to everyone, but it is about how women get blamed when they are made out to be, when they're victimized. And it's a very interesting movie. I mean, it pushes a lot of buttons, but yeah, you take it, depending on where you are in your life, watch it. It's nominated for an Academy Award. Actually, it's nominated for multiple. Best director, best picture, best screenplay, best actress. So yeah, I liked it, but it's not for everyone. It's
difficult subject matter.
Yeah, it is.
It's difficult, and people, and when people get it wrong, they can get it really wrong. Which, again, to talk about Nabokov's Lolita, every film adaptation has taken the exact wrong tact. Like the book is written from the perspective of a man in a sane asylum, who is not supposed to be any kind of moral exemplar or admirable person in any stretch. And I've never seen the movies. I'm only taking this podcast word for it, because I've avoided the movies, because of the kind of the way the culture holds this work. But it's because book critics who read it would look at it and identify with the pedophile in a sympathetic way and cast blame on the victim of the story. And this drove the author absolutely nuts, because it's not, you don't even need a careful reading apparently to get the main point. But if you come into it with, I don't know where I'm going with that, but
after all this happened, God says, get up and move. He moved him on to another place because, as he said, people around him, what are they going to do? Who knows? They could come after him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes the main point of this text for the ancient readers so much more important. Diplomacy and peace. Again, I can get behind those. I can get behind that. That's great. I just wish we had well, anyway, I don't know much more.
It speaks to our interdependence, which we always forget about. We do have to get along, and we do, and we forget. I mean, I don't know why we forget, but we do. So,
because we're humans and we share the mark of our ancestors on our DNA, and we think in similar patterns. And
there's that old thing about no man is an island. We have to live among. We do live among people, and so therefore we need to communicate and understand. And if we have a need or a concern, we need to be able to express it. But we need to do it in a way that's understood by the individual that we're trying to explain ourselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. I know this was difficult subject material. We are going to, the next lesson will bring us up to the story of Joseph. We'll stop just short of that, up to verse 37. And then the week before Easter, the week leading up to Easter, we will be taking off. I won't be preparing a Bible study for that week, because I want to make sure we're ready for our official return to.
I have all kinds of questions.
Oh yeah, you do.
Are we using the leftover communion that we used at Christmas? It's going to be on the table. We pick it up so nobody has to pass communion.
It's going to be in the seats in advance.
Oh, seats in advance. Very good. Very good. Do we have lilies?
There are flowers, including lilies.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Easter morning, you need the smell of lilies for Easter morning.
That's a divisive claim. Some people love the smell of lilies. Some it's overbearing. I like the smell of lilies. I think a lot of it has to do with whether or not you have allergies.
Yeah, that's true.
Allergies.
Yeah,
I don't have allergies, and I know what you mean. I like the smell.
I like the smell of all the flowers, but I can always go away from them if it's too much. So,
Yeah, I might be speaking as someone married to someone with allergies.
Oh,
I at one church that we attended on Easter morning, they always sang the Hallelujah chorus at the end. And I was wondering if there might be a way that, we could have a pre-recorded version of the Hallelujah chorus. I don't know. I don't know what.
We always did that at Northwood.
Oh,
Did
really?
you?
Mm-hmm.
And did you do it like an anthem in the middle or at the end, or?
Well, no, I'm thinking, it seems to me like we did it at Christmas time too. I can't remember if it was at the end. I think it was.
Yeah,
And we invited people to come up and sing with us sometimes.
yeah, that's the way it was done.
Mm-hmm.
That church I attended, we attended. I just think it's a wonderful expression of joy and celebration at the end of the service.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I realize we don't have the choir or anything like that, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a recording of it.
That could be arranged, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
Not, but if it's been a tradition in past.
I told Sharon to play postlude music, but for playing Handel's the Hallelujah chorus, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The Hallelujah. That would be something that's easy to do. We have the means to play it through the speakers, so it's more me just communicating to Sharon that may be what we do. I'll talk to her about it.
Yeah.
As a trivia thing, I know Bob Bloom has a recording
that
of
and
Tabernacle Choir.
Christ the Lord has risen today. I mean, you got to have that one.
We begin with that one.
Mm-hmm.
Good. And I was thinking the other day, when you mentioned something about a song and then you were surprised that we knew the song, maybe not. No, this is not for Easter, but maybe for other times, if people would either write it on a piece of paper and put it in the offering tray or email or whatever, their favorite songs, that would give you an idea of the song tradition at Northwood.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, perhaps at some time you could work those songs in, and then that lifts up those individuals that cherish those songs.
There's a reason why Once in David Royal City is in every Christmas Eve, and that's because Doris Woodruff Philby loves that as her favorite. So and the reason it's now in everyone, not because I feel like forced into it, right? She was very kind, but she said after the first Christmas Eve, "Oh, my favorite song is Once in David's Royal City," and I was really disappointed we didn't get to sing it. I didn't grow up singing that one, but we have it every year now. So yeah. I do listen to that for the feedback. And by the way, Larry, I heard what you said, and Bob has sent me on numerous occasions, either by mail or handing them to me, recordings of Handel's Messiah that he taped on the television. So I do know he has act from the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
Right.
So I do.
So in my church, we grew up singing Hallelujah chorus at Christmas, but we sang Battle Hymn of the Republic every Easter at the conclusion of our service. And I've asked my brother numerous times, why did we sing Battle? And if we didn't sing it with enough fervor, our minister exhorted us to sing it louder. Like, why were we singing Battle Hymn of the Republic? I don't know.
That is
seeing the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
I always think of it. I have it so firmly fixed in my mind in the context of Civil War movies. That was what they were often singing. And so
yeah,
but it's an abolitionist, a fervent abolitionist Christian woman went to the battlefield and wrote that song. And
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I mean, it is very, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. So there you have it.
It's a question of, and I don't know the answer to this, but it's a question of whether militaristic themes can function as metaphor in a healthy way or not. And I think it may depend on the times and the culture you're living in, because triumphant fusing faith with soldiers can be, I mean, the Germans had Gott mit uns on their belt buckles, God on our side, as did the Confederate soldiers, God on our side on their belt buckles. So you can, in that context, you could see that song being heralded as a really unhealthy fusion of militaristic vision and religious vision. But then when you take it into the context of who wrote it, an abolitionist who was trying to say, come on, church, let's instead of being,
Yeah.
So I don't not like the song, but I'm always trying to think about when it's been sung, it always makes me stop and think a lot about it. Like, what do I think of this?
His truth is marching. His truth is marching on. His truth is marching on.
Yeah.
It's
it's interesting. Yeah.